It is February 24th, 2022. As I sit here reading this script now, Russia is in the process of invading Ukraine. It seems their intent is to destroy the Ukrainian military and its political officials and install some sort of puppet regime. It's a sobering thing. I've seen several wars in my lifetime, but this feels different from other Russian aggression or the United States' foray into the Middle East. The world watches on, and people worry as to what the consequences of Russia's military action might reap for the rest of the world. I released a video at the beginning of the year called "This Video Will Change How You View Attack on Titan." In that video, I broke down how Attack on Titan and Game of Thrones are both prolific anti-war stories, and with recent events, I can't help but think how relevant Attack on Titan is now more than ever. In a way, Russia's treatment of the Ukrainians mirrors how Marley treat and view the Eldians. But now you're thinking, okay, this guy's lost it, comparing the works of an anime to real-world political events, but just hear me out here. Humans are not inherently geared to commit large acts of violence towards one another. The average person, if given a gun in order to shoot someone, probably wouldn't do it. But yet we as a species have a long history of war. So how can these two things be? There's not really one right answer here, but a consistent factor has always been the dehumanization of one's enemies. It's much easier for humans to commit acts of violence towards one another if you have been conditioned to see them as inhuman or less than. This concept is known in philosophy as the other, which is roughly defined as the practice of excluding persons who do not fit the norms of the social group, where mainstream social norms do not apply to them for being the other. Starting to ring any bells here, if you've had any history lessons over World War II, I'm sure you're seeing a lot of similarities. Throughout the years, humans have been otherizing one another to justify violence upon them since, well, we've existed. Just as the Nazis did to the Jews, Americans did to the Japanese, Marlians have done to the Eldians, and now Russians are doing to the Ukrainians, and it goes so on and so on and so on. In Attack on Titan, there exists a group of humans known as the Eldians, or subjects of Ymir. Over hundreds of years, the Eldians grew from a small tribe to a great empire, wielding the power of the Titans. As the Eldians gained land, so did they gain population, as they went out of their way to have children with as many people as possible in the lands they conquered. Thus, the Eldian line spread, and with it, their curse. All Eldians are connected to the founding Titan, thus any Eldian can be transformed into a Titan, thus why they are known as the subjects of Ymir. After many years, the Eldian king renounced this empire and took as many of his people possible to a secluded island. There he vowed never to engage in violence once again. Fast forward to the present day in Attack on Titan, the nation of Marley controls much of this mainland territory the Eldians once controlled. Having enslaved thousands of the Eldians, the king couldn't take with him. These Eldians are forced to wear armbands signifying their race, as they are viewed and treated as second-class citizens and even non-humans, often referred to as devils. Marley feeds the fears of its people through fear-mongering propaganda as they constantly play up the threat of an attack from this island. In addition, they bombard young Eldians and Marleyans alike with propaganda, convincing them that those on the islands are devils who only want to kill the rest of the world, and that the Eldians who reside in Marley can only become good Eldians by fighting against these devil Eldians, and doing so they will atone for their sins of their ancestors. Pretty fucked up, huh? Not as fucked up as realizing things like this happen around the world every day to justify violence, genocide, war, what have you. State propaganda, the brainwashing of its people, the dehumanization of its enemies. Many outside Russia probably don't know this, but the Russian people are constantly bombarded with state propaganda against the Ukrainians in Western countries constantly. From comparing Ukrainians to Nazis to depicting them as monsters, Russian propaganda is ruthless and never endless, tirelessly seeping its narrative into the minds of its people. So then what can we learn from Attack on Titan here? Control the narrative, control the people. Through AOT, we see many characters come to this realization that the people they were told to hate since their birth are no different than themselves. There were no devils, after all, only people. It's a bit of an oversimplification, but this is kind of what's happening over in Eastern Europe right now as we speak. Putin, over his 20 years in office, has persisted that Russia is being surrounded and encroached upon by NATO forces and US interests. In his narrative, it is NATO that is pushing the boundaries and security of his country and his people, when in fact, in reality, NATO does the exact opposite. It was created to limit and prevent Russian expansion into Eastern Europe. In Putin's narrative, Russia is simply defending itself from aggression from the Western states. As in one of his recent statements, he accuses Ukraine of engaging in the genocide of 4 million people, referring to the conflict that's been ongoing in eastern Ukraine, definitely not a genocide by the way, and then going further saying Ukraine plans to acquire nuclear weapons, which it will then use on Russia. Putin has used this narrative he has constructed and fed to his people to justify the violence in Ukraine, as well as to threaten any nation that would aid it. Many of the Russians hold this worldview as a truth, which doesn't make them bad people, by the way. And then many of the ones who see the truth are too afraid to say anything for fear of violence. Just the other day, a protest broke out in Moscow against the war in Ukraine, but was broke up within a matter of minutes and hundreds of citizens arrested. It's eerie just how many similarities we see in the relationship between Marley and the Eldians and how Russia engages with its enemies. The lesson to be learned here is this: never trust when the government tells you to hate someone. This doesn't end with Russia and the Ukraine, by the way. People have been using propaganda to dehumanize its enemies and misinform since people developed language. In light of these recent events, I'm not sure if I can ever see Attack on Titan the same. I already viewed it as a profound piece of anti-war media, but now its message rings out more obvious than ever. I hope that with this video, you all can see it as well, and maybe someday we can stop this cycle of violence. I don't normally make this type of content. I try to stick to the conflict in a fantasy world, as opposed to the horrors that we are forced to see in everyday life. But honestly, it seemed like I should put my degree in international relations to good use and try to talk about some stuff in the world. My thoughts go out to the people of Ukraine and those who have lost their lives in this needless conflict on either side, Russian or Ukrainian. At the end of the day, we have to remember the Russian people aren't bad. These aren't bad people. Like many people before them, they have been fed a bad message, and they have believed the bad message. So let's try to remember this going forward, and maybe someday we can all learn from these events. As always, guys, stay safe out there. I hope to see you in the next video. Peace, love, adieu.